Marco Reyes has been talking to this man for 4 hours and 20 minutes and he does not know what he looks like. He knows his voice. He knows the particular way that slows down when Cal is thinking versus when Cal is managing pain to different rhythms. Marco learned to tell them apart somewhere around R2. He knows that Cal grew up in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, that he's been climbing transmission towers since he was 22, that he has a dog named after a Johnny Cash album. He knows that Cal makes a specific sound, not quite a laugh, just an exhale with shape to it, when Marco says something that catches him off guard. He knows that Cal Whitehorse is trapped on Tower 7 Alpha, 150 feet above the Sonoran Desert, with a dislocated shoulder and a safety harness that is the only thing between him and the ground. He knows that the rescue team is 45 minutes out. He knows that 45 minutes is a very long time. Talk to me, Marco says into the headset. It comes out differently than it has the previous times he said it. He doesn't examine the difference. Cal, still there, a breath on the line. Then, still here, the microburst had come out of nowhere, which was a lie Phoenix told itself every monsoon season. Microbursts came out of the same place they always came from, the collision of extreme heat and moisture-laden air. The desert doing what deserts did when the Gulf of Mexico tried to visit. The National Weather Service had issued a watch at 6:14 p.m. By 8:30, 3 watches had been upgraded to warnings. By 9:07, Tower 7 Alpha was in the middle of one of the fastest downburst events recorded in the Phoenix metro area since 2011. Cal Whitehorse had been up the tower since 4 p.m. The grid failure had cascaded across the East Valley starting at 2:30. Extreme heat demand overwhelming a system that had been running at 93% capacity for 11 consecutive days. The kind of strain that infrastructure engineers modeled in worst-case scenarios and utility companies filed away under unlikely event protocols. The unlikely event had occurred. 700,000 customers without power. A city of 4 million in 114-degree heat. Cal's crew had been dispatched to Tower 7 Alpha because the automated diagnostics suggested a fault in the conductor splices on the upper crossarm. 70 feet up, standard work, 2 hours max. Cal had found the fault, repaired it, confirmed continuity, and was beginning descent when the microburst hit. The wind gust, recorded later at 87 miles per hour, took the access ladder off the tower at the 20-foot section. The ladder did not go far. It went far enough. Cal had locked his harness to the tower structure. His left arm had taken the impact of the gust against the crossarm he'd been descending past. The shoulder had gone wrong in a way he recognized from a rodeo accident at 19, dislocated. Painful in the specific, complete way of a joint that had departed its socket and was not coming back on its own. He had his radio. He had his harness. He had a tower that was intact and grounded and not going anywhere. He called dispatch. Marco had taken the call at 9:23 p.m. He was the night shift emergency operations coordinator for Arizona Public Services Phoenix Metro Grid, the person at the center of the crisis map when the system failed. The voice that connected field crews to the decision makers. The calm in the middle of 700,000 people without power in dangerous heat. He had been on shift since 3 p.m. He had taken 47 calls in 6 hours. He had never taken one like this. Dispatch, this is Whitehorse, Tower 7 Alpha. I have an access issue and a shoulder injury. I need rescue protocol. He'd gotten the information fast, location, injury, harness status, weather conditions, and started the rescue dispatch immediately. Cal's crew was 3 miles away but unable to access the tower site due to debris on the service road. The nearest technical rescue unit with tower-rated equipment was 45 minutes out, and that was 45 minutes from when they'd gotten the call, which had been 4 hours and 20 minutes ago, which meant the 45 minutes had become something else entirely. Something had gone wrong with the rescue timeline. A second debris event on the 200 to freeway. A unit diverted. The new ETA, 45 minutes from right now. Marco had been relaying information, coordinating units, managing the grid restoration in parallel, and he had been on the line with Cal Whitehorse this entire time. Because Cal's radio had limited battery and Marco had made the call early that this line stayed open. He had made that call for professional reasons. He was aware, 4 hours and 20 minutes in, that the professional reasons were not the only ones. Your shoulder, Marco said. How is it? Same. Cal's voice was even. It's not getting worse. Is that the honest answer? A pause. The particular pause that meant Cal was deciding something. It's the accurate answer, Cal said. Not the comfortable one. Tell me the comfortable one. The comfortable one is that it stopped hurting an hour ago, and that's actually more concerning than if it still hurt. Because I know enough anatomy to know what nerve involvement looks like, and I'd rather not know that number right now. Marco absorbed this. He kept his voice the same, and hurried, present. The voice he had trained himself to use in extended high-stress communication. The voice that said, I am here and I am not afraid, even when one of those things was more true than the other. Okay, Marco said. Don't think about the number. I'm a lineman. I know Ohm's law, basic anatomy, and how to find the fault in a three-phase conductor. I can't not think about numbers, then think about a different number. What's the dog's name? A beat. Then the exhale with shape, the sound Marco had catalogued at hour 2. The one that meant caught off guard. Cash, Cal said, after Johnny Cash, after the album at Folsom Prison specifically. My dad's favorite record. A pause. He's going to need to go out when I get home. When, Marco noted, not if. He held that word carefully. What does Cash do when you've been on a long shift? Marco said. Sits on my feet, Cal said. Won't move until I've been still for 10 minutes. Like he's taking inventory. Making sure all the parts came back. Smart dog. Smarter than most people I've worked with. A pause. No offense to present company, none taken. I'm just a voice in a headset. A longer pause. You're not just a voice, Cal said. The words were said the way Cal said everything, plainly, as a fact being reported. Not as a confession. Not as an opening. Just as a true thing he had decided to say instead of not say. Marco did not respond immediately. Asterisk. He looked at the crisis map on his screen. Tower 7 Alpha blinking red. The rescue unit icon moving up the 202. The heat index overlay showing the desert at this hour at 97 degrees. Still brutal, the night not enough to undo the day. 150 feet. A harness. A dislocated shoulder. 40-1 minutes. Tell me something about the tower, Marco said. What can you see from up there? Cal could see everything. Phoenix. At night from 150 feet was a specific kind of beautiful that Cal had never found the right words for it, not because it wasn't worth describing, but because the right description would require the other person to have stood where he was standing, which almost no one had. The grid of light spreading to every horizon, the mountains dark against the darker sky, the way the heat lightning from the storm system still active to the south pulsed in the clouds and lit the undersides of them in sequences, the smell, even from here, even in the aftermath of the microburst, the particular smell of the desert after rain, petrichor over creosote, the specific scent of something that had been waiting a long time for water and had finally gotten it. He described it to Marco. He didn't usually describe things. He was a man who worked in systems, voltage and current and load capacity, and the language he used most was the language of specification and measurement. But there was something about 4 hours and 20 minutes in the dark, 150 feet up, alone with a dislocated shoulder and a voice in a headset, that made the habit of economy feel like the wrong kind of discipline. He told Marco about the lightning, about the smell, about the way the city looked from here, not like a place where people had problems, just like light, just like evidence of human beings deciding to be here in the desert and making it work. My grandmother used to say this valley was a story someone told about stubbornness, Cal said. The Hohokam were here 2,000 years ago. They built canals. The desert didn't get easier, they just kept at it. He paused. She was Cherokee, not Hohokam. But she recognized the attitude. Did you grow up with her? Marco said. Summers. In Tahlequah. She lived next to the Illinois River. Different landscape, different everything. But she had the same idea about places. That you don't just live somewhere. You have an understanding with it. Do you have an understanding with Phoenix? I've been here 11 years. I know where every transmission line in the East Valley goes. I know which substations flood in a bad monsoon and which ones hold. He paused. I know this tower. I've climbed it 6 times. He looked down at the desert floor, barely visible in the storm dark. It'll hold me. I know, Marco said. The confidence in his voice, 2 words, no qualification, arrived in Cal's chest in a way that he filed for later. Everything about this night was going somewhere he would need to look at later, when he was on the ground, when the shoulder was managed, when Cash had done his inventory. He was keeping a list in his head of the things that mattered, and the list had gotten longer over the past 4 hours than he'd expected. Marco, he said. Yeah, tell me something about you. Marco was quiet for a beat. He was 31 years old. He had been in this job for 4 years, after 2 years in the field as a line technician, which was how he knew, with a specificity that most dispatchers didn't have, exactly what it felt like to be where Cal was. Not the shoulder, the height, the dark, the way the tower felt alive in a high windy vent, vibrating at frequencies you felt before you heard. He had left field work after his best friend, the lineman, from Tucson named Roberto, had taken a fall that had not been fatal and had not been not fatal in any comfortable way. Marco had sat in a hospital for 9 days and had come out of it unable to go back up. He had become a dispatcher instead. He had become, in the language of people who process things on their own time, very good at the part of the job where he helped other people stay safe on towers he no longer climbed. He did not usually tell people this. I used to climb, he said. Cal was quiet, the quiet that was listening. Line tech, 2 years. I was good at it. He looked at the map. I stopped after someone I was close to had an accident. Bad? Complicated, Marco said. He's okay now. It took a long time to know what okay meant. He paused. I became a dispatcher. I told myself it was a lateral move. Was it? No. He said it clearly, into the headset, into the night, to the man 150 feet up in the dark. I was afraid. I made a decision based on fear and called it a career change. He paused. I'm not usually this honest about that. It's 4 in the morning, Cal said. You've been talking to me for 4 hours, 5 hours and 2 minutes. A pause. That's a long time to talk to someone you've never met. Cal said. Yes, Marco said. Marco. Yeah. When I come down, the radio cut out. 7 seconds. Marco counted them. He had counted things his entire career, load percentages, response times, voltage differentials, and he counted these 7 seconds the way he had never counted anything before, which was without breathing. Then, still here. Cal. His voice came out wrong to fast, not the trained voice, the other one. Cal, I lost you for radio hiccuped. Battery's getting low. A pause. I'm here. Marco put both hands flat on the desk. He looked at them. He made himself breathe. Don't do that, he said. I didn't do anything. The battery. Don't go quiet on me again. A long pause. Okay, Cal said. Quiet. Something in the one word that was different from the previous 5 hours of one words. Marco looked at the rescue unit icon. 31 minutes. He looked at the Tower 7 Alpha indicator. He looked at his hands on the desk, which had stopped shaking, and thought about a lineman in Tahlequah summers. A dog named after a Johnny Cash album. A description of Phoenix at night that had made him close his eyes for 4 seconds without meaning to. You were going to say something, Marco said. Before the radio cut. Was I when I come down? That's what you said. A pause. I was going to ask you something, Cal said. Ask me. I want to ask it when I'm on the ground. Ask me now. A longer pause. The sound of wind on the line, still out there, the storm not done, just less. The tower creaking in a way that Cal had described, at R3, as completely normal. Marco had chosen to believe him. When I come down, Cal said. I want to know what you look like. The operations center was quiet around Marco, his colleagues at other stations. The ambient noise of a grid in partial restoration. The monitors and the calls and the machinery of a city trying to come back on. None of it was as loud as the thing happening in his chest. That's what you wanted to ask? Marco said. It's the thing I've been thinking about for the last 2 hours, plainly. Facts only. I know your voice better than I know most people's faces. I know how you say certain things. I know you used to climb and you stopped because of something that cost you, and you've been managing the distance between who you were and who you are ever since. A pause. I want to know what the face looks like that goes with all of that. Marco was quiet. Cal. Yeah. You have a dislocated shoulder and you're on a tower at 1 in the morning. I'm aware. And you're thinking about what I look like. I'm thinking about a lot of things, Cal said. That one keeps coming back. Outside the operations center windows. Phoenix was half-lit, the restoration moving neighborhood by neighborhood. The darkness retreating in blocks, the city coming back to itself slowly. Marco had been watching it happen all night. He watched it now and thought about stubbornness, about an understanding with a place, about a grandmother on the Illinois River who had known something about staying. 28 minutes, Marco said. I know. When you come down, he stopped. Started again. When you're on the ground and they've looked at the shoulder and you've called someone to get cash, I'll call you, Cal said. What? When I'm on the ground. When the shoulder is managed. I'll call you. Cal, this is the emergency operations line. I know. A pause. Give me your other number. Marco looked at the crisis map. Tower 7 Alpha, Blinking red, 150 feet, 28 minutes. I'll give it to you when you're on the ground, Marco said. Because then I know you made it. The silence on the line was different from all the other silences of the night. It had weight to it, the specific weight of something understood between two people who did not need to name it. Okay, Cal said. Okay. Double quotes asterisk. The rescue team arrived at 1:47 a.m. Marco tracked their approach on the map. On the radio, through the relay from their team lead, a technician named Ortega who gave clear, efficient updates that Marco processed with half his attention while the other half stayed on the channel where Cal's breathing was. He heard it when they reached the tower base, heard the team lead's voice on Cal's radio, confirming visual, assessing the latter's situation, beginning the rigging for assisted descent. Heard Cal's voice change register, still controlled, but differently controlled. The control of someone who had arrived at the moment they'd been aiming for. They're rigging up, Cal said. I know. I can hear. Marco. Yeah. 5 hours and 41 minutes. What? That's how long we talked. I was keeping count. Marco closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. I know, he said. Is that? Cal stopped. Is that strange? That I was counting? No, Marco said. I was counting too. The sound of the descent rigging. Ortega's team moving efficiently, the scrape of hardware against tower steel. Phoenix below them. Cash at home on a dog bed, waiting for inventory. When you come down, Marco said. Yeah, there's a place near the substations on McDowell. It's a 24-hour place, nothing special. They know me because I come in after long nights sometimes. Cal's breathing on the line. They have good breakfast, Marco said. It's almost 2 in the morning, like I said. A pause. Then the exhale with shape, the first time Marco had heard it since the radio cut out. And he felt the return of it the way you felt a power grid come back online, section by section. The dark retreating. When I come down, Cal said. When you come down, Marco said. Asterisk Cal. Whitehorse touched ground at 2:09 a.m. Marco knew the exact moment because Ortega called it and because. Simultaneously, the sound on the line changed, the wind gone, the tower creak gone, the particular acoustic quality of open air at altitude replaced by the closer sound of ground level. Voices, the team moving around him. And then Cal said, I'm down. 2 words. Flat, exact, the way he said everything. But Marco, who had learned his voice across 5 hours and 41 minutes in the dark, heard the thing underneath them. The enormity of a very simple fact. You're down, Marco said. Yeah. How's the shoulder? Ready to be someone else's problem. A pause. And Marco could hear the team moving around him, Ortega doing the field assessment. Ortega says probable dislocation, possible labral involvement. She wants me at Banner University. Though. Marco. Go to the hospital, Cal. I'm going. A pause. Give me the number. Marco looked at the grid map, Tower 7 Alpha indicator shifting from red to yellow as the rescue team confirmed the site secured. The East Valley restoration at 63%. Outside, Phoenix beginning to breathe again. He read out his cell number. He heard Cal repeat it back once. Exactly, the way a man repeated a sequence he intended to keep. Go, Marco said. Going, Cal said. The line stayed open for more seconds. No words. Just the sound of the Arizona night and the distant activity of the rescue team and Cal. Whitehorse breathing. And then it closed. The call came at 5:52 a.m. Marco was still. At the station, his shift had ended 2 hours ago, but the grid restoration wasn't complete and he had stayed, which was something he did more often than he discussed with anyone. His cell phone showed an unknown Arizona number. This is Marco, he said. It's Cal. A pause. Shoulder is back in. They gave me something for the pain. I'm to be informed I sound, quote, approximately normal. How do you feel? Like someone hit my shoulder with a truck and then a very competent doctor fixed it. A pause. Better than I sounded at midnight. You sounded fine at midnight. I sounded like a man trying not to let a stranger know how scared he was. Marco was quiet. Were you scared? He said. Yes, plain. Factual. Not about the tower. I know towers. Not about the shoulder. I've had worse. I was scared about the radio. When it cut out, a pause. I didn't want you to think I was gone. Something moved through Marco's chest that had no professional category. Cal, he said. Yeah. The place on McDowell. 24-hour diner. It's called Santos. Is it still open? It's always open. Marco stood up from the station console. His shift was over. The grid at 78% and climbing. Yolanda coming in for the day shift at 7. I'm leaving now. I need to go home and get cash first. Bring cash. A pause. Then the exhale with shape longer this time, more room in it. The sound of a man who had been on a tower for 9 hours and a hospital for 3 hours and was now, finally, somewhere on the other side of it. That's a good diner that allows dogs. Cal said. Santos allows everything, Marco said. I've tested this. They met at 6:31 a.m. Marco was there first, the corner booth. Santos's cook already knowing his order. The particular early morning quiet of a place that belonged to the people who worked nights. He was on his second coffee when the door opened. He recognized Cal before he had any rational basis to recognize him. 6 feet, easy in his body the way people were easy who worked physically and had made peace with what their bodies could do. Cherokee, mid-30s, with dark eyes that moved immediately to Marco's face and stayed. He had his arm in a sling. He had a dog on a leash, big, brown, some kind of retriever mix, who was doing a systematic nose-lid survey of the diner floor, with the focused intensity of an animal who understood. That floors contained information. Cal stood at the end of the booth and looked at Marco. Marco looked at Cal. Hi, Marco said. Hi, Cal said. He was smiling, small, but there. You're shorter than I expected. People say that, and younger. Also that. Cal slid into the booth across from him, which required some navigation with the sling, and Cash settled under the table and immediately put his chin on Marco's foot. He doesn't do that with strangers, Cal said. Maybe he knows, Marco said. What? That I've been talking to his person for 6 hours. Cal looked at him across the table. The diner light was warm, early morning, the sun coming up somewhere out there over the desert, the heat beginning its day. Cal's face in that light was, Marco had known it would be a specific thing to see it, and it was. You climbed, Cal said. 2 years? Why'd you really stop? He said it without preamble, not because he was careless, but because they had spent the night past the point where preamble was necessary. Roberto came off a tower in Tucson, Marco said. 60 feet. He survived. But in the 9 days I sat in that hospital I realized I had been, he paused. I had been up there every time he was. In my head, I climbed every tower he climbed. I landed when he landed. He looked at his coffee. After he came back I couldn't separate what I was afraid of from what I was afraid of for him. So I came down, and became the voice, Cal said, and became the voice. Cal was quiet for a moment. Cash shifted under the table, taking inventory. Marco realized. The dog had been doing it since he arrived. I've worked with a lot of dispatchers, Cal said. Most of them, the good ones, they stay professional. They stay useful. They know where the line is. And you knew where the line was and you stayed on it the whole night and it's still, he stopped. Started again. It was still the most honest I've talked to anyone in a long time. Marco looked at him. I talk to people in crisis for a living, Marco said. I'm trained to stay present, stay calm, keep them focused. I know what I'm doing when I do it. Yes, tonight was different. Yes, Cal said again. When the radio cut out, Marco said. 7 seconds. I counted them. I know. I could hear it in your voice after. You could hear. You stopped being the dispatcher voice for about 3 sentences. Cal held his gaze. It was the first time I heard what your voice actually sounded like. Marco was quiet. The diner moved around them, Santos's cook moving in the kitchen. Another early morning patron at the counter, Cash doing a second inventory pass. The Phoenix dessert outside the window, already bright. Already committed to the day. Marco reached across the table. Asterisk, he put his hand next to Cal's, the good arm. The right one, his hand open on the table. Not on top of Cal's, next to it. The way you put something down that you wanted someone to pick up if they wanted to. Cal looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. Not hesitating. Marco understood, registering, doing what he did with the things on his list. The things he'd been keeping count of all night. Then he put his hand in Marco's. His grip was careful on account of the shoulder, his whole right side moving gingerly. The body still in negotiation with what had happened to it. But the grip itself was certain. The grip of a man who climbed transmission towers for a living and knew the difference between a handhold that would give and one that wouldn't. This one wouldn't. Tomorrow I'm going to be useless. Cal said. The shoulder. I'm not going to be able to do anything. Okay, Cash is going to need walking. Okay. A pause. You don't have to, Cal. Marco said. Yeah, I counted 6 hours and 2 minutes. Cal looked at him. Something crossed his face that had been there all night in the voice, that quality of a man who did not give things easily and, when he did, meant them completely. So did I, he said. Outside. Phoenix committed fully to the morning. The grid came back on. Marco knew without checking. Knew it the way he knew the rhythms of the system he watched. Felt the city restore itself block by block until it was all the way back, all the light on. All the people waking up to a day that had arrived. Catch side under the table. Content, apparently, with what the inventory had found. Marco didn't let go.